engaged learning is now a principal priority at Cornell University. In fact, there are two priorities that relate to what we're doing. One is engaged learning, and the other is internationalization. Well, Richard Kiley is a very busy person, and he is now doing a workshop in New York City, and he could not come here because of that. And so we thought we would use information and communication technologies, in fact, to bring him here. And so we do have him on tape, and I managed to get him into a corner one day and asked him several questions, and he responded. And the audio level may be low, and so what I want to do is to tell you first what some of the questions are that we addressed, so that you will perhaps be able to focus a little more. We asked him, how does engaged learning influence the culture of colleges and universities? You may remember a long time ago, like yesterday, that we talked about reinventing universities. And so the question here is, how does engaged learning contribute to that reinvention? And then we asked him, what are the principal challenges to introducing engaged learning in the university environment? I think we heard this morning and throughout our sessions here that this is not a simple process. It's a challenging process. In fact, this morning I said, you know, I'm a professor and I just want to lecture and give an exam and you know, go do my research. And it's not as easy as that. And so the question is, how do you support engaged learning in a university? And then how do you, I think a third major question we asked was, how do you spread that pedagogical approach into the university? How do you support it? And so be patient. We will turn the video on and see how it runs and get answers to those questions.
I'm talking with Dr. Richard Kiley. Richard, how does engaged learning, or sometimes we call it service learning, contribute to the culture of colleges and universities?
It's a really nice question. So I think one way that I think about it is from, I use a particular approach where I think about it in terms of pedagogy, think about it in terms of research, think about it in terms of institutional support, and then I also think about it in terms of how to support communities outside of the university. Engaged learning or service learning is a wonderful approach to pedagogy because you're combining theory and practice. So what you're teaching in the classroom, the problems you're focused on can be applied to a particular community organization or community setting. So it enhances the learning that students have beyond just sort of memorization and recall, and moves towards problem solving and analysis and creativity. So from a pedagogical standpoint, I find service learning merges that theory and practice. It allows students to begin to think about their learning in ways that extend beyond the classroom.
The word practical seems to me to pop up here.
Yeah, definitely. So service learning definitely takes what might be abstract and gives it much more of a practical flavor. So a student who steps outside the classroom and works in a community, not only that, you're working in communities that are often unfamiliar. There's a context that a student might not be accustomed to, where the community partners have different backgrounds, different language, different culture. So even the notion of working across difference comes into play. It brings in a very robust diversity component that a student might not encounter when they're in the classroom, or maybe the perspectives aren't as different. When they work with a variety of stakeholders outside of the university, it means that they have to learn how to listen better, learn how to understand perspectives that might be outside their frame of reference. So it engages pedagogy in a very different way. It's no longer a simulation. The stakes and the sense of responsibility tend to increase for the student because their work has a direct bearing on the livelihood of a community member or a set of community issues. So in many ways, it forces a student and the faculty to think about their learning in a very different way. It's no longer a two-way street between the faculty members and a student, but the knowledge that they're generating from their learning is shared more widely and it has and could have a direct impact.
Can you give us an example of what is a successful?
Yeah. So, and of course, most of these programs are very challenging because they're unpredictable, complicated environments once you enter into a community setting. But one particular example that I'm more accustomed to is I started doing this work back in 1993, and my first experience was working in the Atlantic coast of Nicaragua, in a fairly resource-poor setting, not a lot of access to clean water, not a lot of access to health care, employment, food, shelter. We worked with communities that had just overcome a civil war, so that complicated things. Of course, they experienced a lot of natural disasters as well. In 1998, there was a horrific hurricane there, there was an earthquake in '72. So it's a struggling area, particularly around health. And so I partnered with a faculty member who teaches international health. My background was political science, and we combined our course. So I taught a course of history, politics, language, culture of the Atlantic coast. She taught a course on international health, and then we worked at a local hospital, and we conducted health clinics in remote areas where the locals in the town that we were working in couldn't access, or at least didn't have the resources to access that. So our work complemented and supplemented the health care that the region was struggling with. And for students to design a health clinic in a remote region that's only accessible by boat, to set up the stations, to diagnose some of the symptoms, to walk patients through a series of tests, and then ultimately pass on information to a doctor and then prescribe an intervention. It's a very complicated task. Even just doing triage and identifying those patients who are in most need urgent care is a process that's you wouldn't encounter if you're simulating it in a classroom. Because it's truly a life or death situation in some cases. For example, if a baby has a staph infection and needs antibiotics, the student can hopefully make the right health assessment as a trained to do that, and then the patient can go through the clinic and get the kind of attention that they need.
How does this get fed back into the academic program?
So at the same time, students are doing all sorts of preparation before they go, which is really important in terms of the pedagogies. Students are trained in specific ways to have success when they actually get to the community. One thing that I always want faculty members to recognize is that the pedagogy has to have sort of a pre-component, a during component, and a post-component, so that the reflection and the learning is continuous. If you're going to go into a health setting, then the students have to have a particular training in order to make specific health assessments with some accuracy. If they need language training, they might have to do that as well prior to going. If the country speaks a different language, if they're conducting research, then they'll need research skills and training. And then when they get on site, there's a continuing learning process as well. One of the big pieces of service learning is to train students in how to engage in reflection, which is before, during, and after the experience.
Do you want to define reflection?
So reflection for me, and I'll borrow from Collier and Williams, it's a systematic consideration of experience. Usually in an academic setting, it's tied to learning outcomes. So it's not just sort of a random set of learning, that you're actually paying attention to the health conditions in a particular environment and the sources and solutions to those conditions. So it's an iterative process in which you're engaging with literature, you're engaging with a faculty member, you're engaging with the environment, your own set of assumptions, stakeholders within that environment, and you're gathering as much knowledge as possible to help you understand the source and solution to a particular set of problems. So it's a very systematic process.
What are the principal obstacles in trying to introduce engaged learning in the university?
Well, for one of the first things is just to understand it's kind of counter-normative to traditional pedagogy. So, in a classroom, the environment is controlled, the syllabus is fairly static. There aren't too many unpredictable things that are going to happen. You go week by week and follow a sequence of activities. When you step outside the classroom, the environment becomes very unpredictable. So I think one of the challenges is becoming comfortable with that complexity, with the unpredictable nature, and working with community members who may have questions and issues that aren't covered in the syllabus you haven't prepared for. And so it's responding to that, and it may actually mean you have to pursue a different discipline to understand that problem.
So it's really a multidisciplinary course.
Definitely. So problems for me and for the field, and it's our responsibility to make sure that we give funding to provide that training. So we require all of our grant recipients to go through a training process to make sure that they're well versed in reflective pedagogy.
Are there some disciplines that are better suited to engage with?
Yeah, I think you can do engaged learning. Any discipline that has a problem and that has that problem in real life can use engaged pedagogy. But there are programs where you see where more sort of efforts being made to incorporate service learning. It seems like it's more of a natural fit. Education departments, work with schools, and work with students in schools. Often have sort of it's more inclined to engage in this work. Health programs in particular, social work is another program, sociology. These are planning departments. They have a certain ability where there's more application of their work. Natural resources, they're working in environmental stewardship. Those types of programs have sort of immediate set of community partners that are available more readily. And their curriculum tends to be more suited to this kind of work as well. But I would say any discipline can do this work.
Is there any sign that engaged learning or service learning might become a movement or is a movement in university culture?
Yeah, I think it is already a movement. I mean, it's from the 80s, it's gone through different stages. I think in the 80s, it was a lot about 70s and 80s about doing something in the community, so it was more about volunteerism, civic engagement, and community service. And then in the 80s and 90s, it started pushing toward how do we connect academic learning to doing good work outside the institution and apply that learning in meaningful ways. And so that typically were individual faculty developing courses. Now, post-2000, it's really more about engaging the institution, creating centers that support faculty, and really working with departments to create majors and minors and certificates to make sure that the curriculum is sequenced, again, to get that sort of what's the preparatory work that needs to be done, what kind of coursework do we have while they're actually engaged in the community, and then what happens after they come back. Now there are particular types of research skills that students have to develop to engage with communities in particular ways. So now we're seeing much more sophisticated sequenced curriculum around engagement. And I think that's the movement toward the future. There may be, sort of like women's studies or environmental studies, there may be, right now there's sort of an interesting part of the movement is that there's a movement toward creating a separate discipline, but then incorporating this work in each discipline. And I see both of those as really important. So you have sort of a vertical thinking, deep thinking about how you do this work that can inform other disciplines you would incorporate into that. But sort of a disciplinary focus that makes sense for the kinds of issues that are relevant outside the real world.
There are universities that are contemplating this kind of approach. Do you have any advice for them?
I think thinking very deeply about the fact that work is the fact that you can have an impact on
Oh, I have another question. I probably sound like a professor with all these questions. The second question is, do you see anything different here? I have a tie. No coat. No coat. Now, what does that symbolize? Well, yesterday, I think it was, and you don't remember yesterday probably, yesterday, at the end of my opening comments, I said that this was a conference, but I suggested that we should also call it a workshop, because we wanted to work and get something accomplished. And so I've taken off my coat, and I hope that now we can do some work. I mean, some of you have worked already, but we want to all work together. And it has to do with a guidebook. The idea of a guidebook got started perhaps a year ago, maybe less, and it came up because we saw that the idea of teaching information and communication technologies for development had really taken off, largely because of our colleagues at APC ICT. But the question was, can we develop some materials, such as a guidebook, for students who are going to be involved in this ICTD learning. And so it was just an idea, but it got pushed and pushed and pushed, and so therefore what we have here is the building of an ICT service learning guidebook, but note that it says a work in progress. And that's why I've taken off my coat, and this is the work in progress. A couple of quick things. So we're going to go through the guidebook very quickly, and most of you have had a chance at least to look at the cover, if you haven't gotten beyond there. But oh, I don't know why that. There we are. Yeah. On the cover, you probably saw something that asks for your suggestions. And throughout the draft that you have, I've also put in bold type some questions that came up as we were writing this guidebook. The guidebook has got some original material in it based on experience, based on research. Richard Kiley, whom you saw not long ago, has done a lot of research on engaged learning and service learning. So it's based on those things, but it's also based on what others have done, including our colleague from Hong Kong, and some toolkits from Brown University and from Duke University and so forth. So a number of people have done toolkits or guidebooks or handbooks, and we have taken the liberty of learning from them and stealing from them. But we've tried to be, oh, that's all right. Thank you very much. We've tried to be transparent and given them credit where credit was appropriate. Now let me say a couple of other quick things before we start onto the guidebook. The guidebook has been aimed at students, clearly aimed at students. But in fact, there is an indirect target of this guidebook, and the indirect target includes other stakeholders, and those other stakeholders are faculty members and potential partners out in the community with whom the service learning will take place. Now, why do we suggest that it's intended for those other stakeholders also? It's so that there will be common expectations between the students and the faculty members and the partners in the community. So all the stakeholders will understand what is behind the project and where they're going and what the expectations are. One other assumption that takes place in the building of this is that this is a multidisciplinary process, a multidisciplinary phenomenon. Development itself is multidisciplinary. You heard this morning from Shorna and Amy the different kinds of disciplines that took place in the preparation of the project in Thailand. And we've seen it in other cases where it's not just communication that's involved, but it's political science and so forth. So we're talking about a multidisciplinary process. Okay, with those comments then, let me go to the content of the guidebook. We speak early in the guidebook about the emerging movements, the recognition of ICTD by many different organizations, international agencies, governments, and so forth. And we talked about, and in the guidebook, we talk about the reinvention of universities. And we talk about ICT in the university curriculum. And then we take considerable pains to motivate students. And we try to motivate them, as you'll see in the guidebook, by giving them examples of where students have had an impact. One of the cases is the case of the woman in Thailand who made doormats. Do you remember the doormat story? The doormat story is about the woman who was invited to go to a telecenter, and she learned about the possible marketing of doormats through e-commerce. And where did she get that clue? Where did she get that idea? She got the idea from a student who was there at that telecenter, who gave her the idea of using the internet to market her doormats. And not only did she market her doormats, but her friends also began to market the doormats, and they made a contract with one of the big department stores. And so this woman is a doormat success. And students were involved. And so what we tried to do is to build into the guidebook examples of where students could be effective. Okay. Now what's happening is that the slides are jumping ahead two at a time instead of one at a time, but I think we can deal with that. We have tried early in the guidebook also to give examples of service learning in action. And we've taken the advantage of Hong Kong and the Polytech University there, and mentioned the really fantastic things that have been done there. Again, giving students a picture of what is possible, trying to motivate them. And we give examples from many universities of the variety of disciplines that are using service learning. And I think I have that up here. Yeah, there we are. This is in the guidebook. And there are more than 200 syllabi on the web that people can look at and see how others have developed service learning courses. You'll notice there, if you can see it, that communication is up there, but if you look on the web, you'll find that there's communication but no development, communication, ICT, and development. And so what we've suggested in the guidebook is for students to look at some of those disciplines, to go on the line and look at them and see how others have developed their courses so that the students could get some idea as to what would be involved and what they might be able to pick up in terms of their own education. So we hope that at a certain point we have motivated students. Now, we want next to introduce them to the concept of service learning. And at this point, we're not going into communication. We're talking about the different characteristics of service learning. And although we're talking to the students, we hope that the faculty is overhearing what's going on. Again, so that there's a mutual expectations. And so what are the characteristics? Well, they're listed there in the guidebook. Let me just go through them. But first, I want to put this quote up, and it's essentially saying what I said before, that it's helpful for for both the students and the faculty to understand together those characteristics. So what are those characteristics? You see, it's supposed to go ahead one at a time, but it's going ahead two at a time. Anyway, is it I who's doing it wrong? Okay. But that's all right, because I wanted to stop after number 2 anyway. There are 10 characteristics that are in the guidebook. And we explain each one of them. And I just wanted to stop at number 2 because I think it illustrates why it's important as a way of communicating between the students and the faculty. For example, if you were to look on page 8, under community partnership, it says here, effective partnerships should exhibit the following characteristics. Effective partnerships should exhibit the following characteristics. And then we indicate what those characteristics are. Now, that's important to the students, but to whom else is it important? Well, it's important to the faculty, and it's important to the partnerships, so that everybody knows what those expectations are concerning partners and stakeholders in this arrangement. Well, here we go. And I'm not going to talk about the others because they're all there. These are the different ones that are in the book. Let's see if we can just one slide. Oh, okay. Now, we also make a point that really came up with Richard Kiley, and that is the importance of management in this kind of an operation. It's not a case of a faculty member doing a lecture and giving an exam. There are many other activities that are involved, and so it probably takes, to be successful, some kind of a unit, a managerial unit in the university. And so what can students expect from having a managerial unit? Can they expect funding? Can they expect training? the important thing is that, that this is a piece of the action that is important. And I think that places like Duke and Brown University, and certainly we know in Hong Kong, because Dr. Chan is the head of one of these units, how important they are. Are they not, Dr. Chan? Of course they are. Otherwise he wouldn't be here. No, it's very important. Then we take a section of the guidebook and point out the benefits of this process, the service learning process, to the students. And we have a whole collection of processes, and then we're going two at a time again. Again, I can't explain that, but here they are. Acquire knowledge, problem solving, awareness of real world problems, critical thinking and reflection skills, and so forth. And these are all in the guidebook. And then we talk about the keys to successful partnerships. And there's supposed to be 3 C's up there. There they are. Oh, now I'm going to go back. Collaboration. The word collaboration comes up a lot, both in the guidebook and in the literature, and in some of the discussions I've heard at this workshop. Collaboration is important between the faculty or the university and the people in the field, the partners in the field. So in the guidebook you'll find the words collaboration, connections, and commitment, all explained. And I just want to mention one thing about commitment, and it's in the guidebook, so I'll just be brief about it. Typically, service learning projects are not one-shot deals. They're not one-shot deals. There is a commitment between and among partners for longer-term involvement. For example, I think you heard my colleagues from Cornell this morning talking about what's going to happen next year, right? So it started this year, but there'll be another group of students, and that project will go on next year. So it's not a matter of our going in and getting out, and that's the end. There's a longer-term commitment, and this happens in many service learning projects. What partners do you engage? What kinds of partners do you engage? And I'll give you advanced warning, I have a bias when it comes to ICTD. But I won't tell you my bias quite yet. I'm going to see if I can put up some of these possible partners. There we are. Schools, and we've heard of that already. Clinics, local government offices, public service agencies of various kinds, religious organizations, and business enterprises. All of these could be good partners for service learning activities. And I think you've heard some of those mentioned. My bias is community learning centers. And we heard earlier about Petty's participation with community learning centers in Thailand. But you know, and I don't know, how many are there in Thailand? You mentioned more than 1,000, yes, in Thailand, community learning centers? But community learning centers are all over Asia. I'm going to try to I'm going to try to do a few of them. Again, I don't know if it's going to go two at a time, but okay, here's a community learning center in Cambodia. And I want you to look carefully and see if there's anything interesting in all of them. Community Learning Center in Mongolia. Here's a Community Learning Center in Bhutan. Here's a Community Learning Center in Thailand, and you saw that with Petty. Here's a Community Learning Center in Nepal. I'm going to skip this slide. Here we are. There's another Community Learning Center, and there's a student, you can see, helping out. Is there anything related to our topic at this workshop, this conference, that you saw in those Community Learning Centers? What? Yes, there were ICTs in most of those shots. You saw computers, and this is what happens in a lot of community learning centers. And by the way, I'm not only talking about community learning centers. I have another category of these community organizations that fit into this category. Sometimes there are telecenters involved. Telecenters have been on the scene since 1995. I was much involved back in those days in promoting the idea of telecenters. Literacy centers, non-formal education centers. One of the reasons there are a lot of these in Asia is because UNESCO had, I should use the word has, they have now a major program to support community learning centers. Why am I biased? And by the way, I'm not saying this is the only option. I'm just suggesting that for universities in Asia that are starting out with this idea, community learning centers is a good start. And this is what we point out in the guidebook. First off, there are many of them. Second, community learning centers, by their nature, already emphasize development. And that's what we're talking about, aren't we? ICTs for development. So they're already doing development. We don't have to convince them. They often emphasize long-term learning, lifelong learning, or some kind of learning. They are learning centers. So the idea of learning is already embedded in their mandate. And the last on the list is that it gives students a chance to interact with ordinary, normal people. Does that sound strange? Well, why do I say that? Well, you know, many students are graduated from universities and they go into businesses as executives or junior executives. They go into government service and become bureaucrats, and many of them lose touch with ordinary people. But this gives students a chance to work with ordinary people. And so we emphasize that in the guidebook. Now, those are the kinds of things we kind of lay out in the beginning of the guidebook. Then we move to the how-to phase of the guidebook, and particularly now we're talking about a guidebook for ICTD. We're not just talking about any kind of a guidebook. We're trying to take what we have learned from other guidebooks or toolkits or handbooks, and we're now plugging in to it what relates to communication. And so we've already heard from a number of speakers that there are really three important phases of the implementation, right? One is the preparation stage, and the second is what? The implementation stage or the field stage, and what's the third? Yes, the final wrap-up stage. And so what happens in this pre-engagement in the classroom if you're dealing with communication and development? Well, I contend that an early first step in training students for this kind of activity is for them to understand communication. We're not talking here about information and communication technologies. We're talking about communication. And they need to understand how communication works. They need to understand that communication does not increase yields of corn. Communication does not cure illnesses. Communication is related to knowledge, motivation, behavior, skills. Those are the things that communication can deal with. And I confess that the guidebook goes very heavily into this issue. And let's see, I forgot whether I... here's how I justify it. It's a comment from a very recent World Bank publication. It's, in fact, a 15-module World Bank publication on the uses of information and communication technology in agriculture. And note what the bank says. It's important to begin any ICT in agriculture intervention by focusing on the need that the intervention is proposed to address, not the need for ICT. What is the need that the intervention proposes? The need for better and more timely market information, better access to financial services, timely and appropriate crop and disease management advice, and so forth. So the process does not start with ICT. It starts with communication and understanding the needs in the community and what the relationship to those needs is communication. And so we go into that, and I won't belabor it here, but I just want you to know that I've taken the liberty in the guidebook, or we have in the guidebook, to emphasize that communication is an important piece of the pre-engagement in the classroom. We suggest that the preparation in the classroom might involve students looking at ICTD examples and case studies and have discussions about these in the classroom. Now, please remember something I said early on, and it's that we're dealing with a multidisciplinary phenomenon or process. And in a lot of classrooms where this is taking place, there are students coming from different disciplines. In the flood program that you all talked about, were there not many different disciplines, some people from all disciplines? And so it's useful in the preparedness stage, the pre-engagement stage, for students to understand how ICT works in development situations. And it's useful for students to study the communities where the partner exists. Now, sometimes we talk about cultural immersion and knowing something about the culture. And somebody may say, well, in our university, we're not talking about global, engaged learning. We're not talking about students going from Ithaca, New York to Thailand. It'll take place within our own country. Is there immersion there? Is there a need to understand the culture of the community in that situation? The answer, and we emphasize this in the guidebook, the answer is yes. Because when you're talking about development, inevitably you're talking about cross-cultural boundaries and trying to cross those boundaries. And what do we mean in this case, by cross-cultural? Well, it's a matter of more educated with lesser educated. It's a case of more wealthy talking with not very wealthy. It may be a discussion between males and females. There are various intercultural kinds of situations that need to be addressed in studying the community. Now, I'm going to try to go back because I somehow or other. Okay. Pre-engagement in the classroom. It's important to bring in resources. And again, I think you saw in a slide this morning in the flood control example, a whole list of experts that Amy and Shorna brought in to the classroom. They brought in political scientists. They brought in people who knew the culture of Thailand. They brought in an array of different people who could help students understand the issue of the communities and the development issues and the challenges that were evident in those communities. Ropes. What a... You're laughing. You're the ones who did this. Ropes. You did ropes at Cornell. Why on earth would you deal with ropes in the pre-preparation stage of engagement? Ropes. Well, the effort here was to build teamwork among the students, because you have a team of students going into the field and into a field that most of them have never been before. And so those students, some who had never met before, had to learn to trust each other and to be able to discuss frankly with each other. And so the ropes course that the Cornell students went through was intended to build teamwork, colleagueship, partnerships among the students. Now, there are other ways to do this, but the important thing is that it be done. I've mentioned expert resources, development issues and challenges, team building, which is the ropes issue, and reflections. You heard that word before today. Yes, from several presenters. Reflections. There are some who have written in this literature about engaged learning and service learning that a major importance in the process is reflecting. Now, in the guidebook, we mention it in this list, but we don't really discuss it early on. In fact, we go through this pre-engagement stage and then engagement, and we take up the topic toward the end in the third phase. But we emphasize that, in fact, reflection takes place throughout the process. And we provide in the guidebook some ideas for doing reflection. Here's an example. Examine your own uses of information and communication devices during a period of 1 week. Keep a record in a journal. Think about how and why you use them. What did you accomplish by using them? What would have been the consequences if you had not used them? And what kinds of communication were involved? It's a matter of getting students to reflect. There's no right answer, there's no wrong answer. They're not being graded on this. It's to get them to think about what they are getting involved in. And so, in various parts of the guidebook, we present in little boxes ideas for reflection. It's a key issue in the whole process. Now, what are the kinds of things? We're talking now about about engagement. And by the way, one of the things I didn't put on that list, although I may have put it on the list and I may have skipped over because of the system here. One of the possible pre-engagement activities, given the nature of it being an interdisciplinary group of students, is for some of the students, particularly the ones with the computer background or the ICT background, to develop projects in their heads that they present to the other students, to show the other students how you can teach web searching, for example, or how you can teach getting email. And you can do that in the pre-engagement stage, not only to practice what you can do when you go to the field, but also to guide the other students who may be philosophy majors. Okay. This says, go pick up your laundry. It's ready at the... Sorry about that. On this slide, what I'm suggesting, and I'm suggesting it to the students in the guidebook, what are the kinds of things that the students can do related to ICTD in a community learning center? Now, I could go around the room, and you could also all suggest things that students could do going into a community. You can teach them how to search. You can teach them how to use, well, I put the list up there. Computer functions, record keeping, e-commerce, M-government, meaning the use of mobile phones for government access to government documents and so forth. Oh, here's a reflection that they can do in the field. And not only reflect themselves, but also reflect in discussions with other team members. If your team collaborates with a community learning center that has recently obtained computers, how do you get local women into the CLC, the Community Learning Center, and how do you get them to trust computers? Do they have to learn to trust computers? I think I heard somebody say this morning, or this afternoon, somebody said something about the problem of getting women, right? We know that in the research and the projects I've been involved for the last 15 years. We know that it's sometimes difficult to give women access to that kind of technology. What else can the students do in a CLC? Well, does that look familiar to you? Michael, does that look familiar to you? No, you never saw that before. Okay, well, they can use the primers to hold workshops with local people, government people, teachers, ordinary people. They can provide help in web searching. They can help people build websites. One of the, let's see, I'll get to post in just a minute. Let me tell you a story about Thailand. Petty showed you a picture of a learning center, the Weaving Learning Center, right? Do you remember that? And I don't know how strong your memory is, but there was a picture of Petty and 3 other people sitting on the platform in the learning center, which was really somebody's home. But one of the persons sitting there was the man who owned the home where that computer was and where you saw lots of children. Well, somehow or other I got in a conversation with him in my great Thai language. No, I don't know Thai, through Petty. We got in a conversation as to what kinds of information he needed. And by the way, this is one of the things that I emphasize in the guidebook, that students going into a community learning center can help identify in the community what the information needs are and what communication resources already exist. Valuable information for lots of different kinds of people in the center. I want to tell you about this man. This man told us that he goes to various community learning centers because he only had an 8th grade education, which is what is mandated in Thailand. And he wanted some way for his community to remember the Isan culture, the local culture, because he said it's disappearing. And so one of the reflection items you'll find in the guidebook is how, if you were in that community, how would you help that man protect the Isan culture? How would you help the community do that? Do you have any ideas on how they could do that? I don't see much brightness around the room. I mean, you all know how you could do that, but I'm not going to tell you. Anyway, we've got to hurry on because my laundry is waiting. Post-engagement, which is very important. I think I borrowed the list from Dr. Chan. I'm not sure. But if I did, Dr. Chan, I gave you credit. What are the kinds of things that you can do in the final stage, the last stage? Remember, we had pre-engagement, engagement, and now what I call evaluation, but it could include other things. Debriefing, students writing journals. They get into reflection expressed in various ways. You saw that some people, you saw excerpts of some people who wrote in journals about their experience. An individual covenant where students think about what they can do next with their with their learning. There can be recognition events. Not long ago, I went on the campus, and there were students with displays, posters, examples of things that they had done in service learning projects. So they were sharing their experience with others. And one of the groups told me that, well, we're building a school in Haiti, and we've got one group of students who are designing it from architecture, from the College of Architecture. We have another group of students who are raising money from arts and sciences. We have another group of students who are working on the curriculum. These students were all working on building an elementary school in Haiti, and they were here in public telling us, the world, the campus, about it. And I think on the list of possibilities, public expressions, such as web pages, news, and so forth. And then I finish up in the guidebook, or we finish up in the guidebook, with some ideas about evaluation, and I've listed them there, and of course they're in the guidebook. So the question is, what's missing? And I go back, well, one of the things I think is missing, and you can help me with this, and this is why we're talking about a workshop. That's why I took my coat off, so that you would think about working. And you can contribute either, if we have time, I'm not sure we do, but you can either comment now or send us an email, because we need your help. What's missing? What is the impact on universities in service learning? We've talked about the impact on students. We talk about the benefits to communities. Should we deal in the book, in the guidebook, with funding service learning? And then I go back to the questions that you find on the front page of the guidebook. What kinds of issues, ideas, information should be added? What items should be deleted? What items should be expanded? And what items in this document should be reduced? And what I haven't put on there is, how about the language? Are we talking at the too high a level or too low a level, or at the right level? We tried to use straightforward English, and the question is, were we successful or not successful? So, there we are, comments to me. And I should note also that in the document itself, in bold type, we have raised questions. Should we do this or should we do that? And so we're expecting you to answer those questions. That's a brief look at the guidebook. We hope that you will help us. We are not pretending to be experts, because no one has developed a guidebook for ICT and development. And so this, you can be part of a pioneering effort. But you have to make a contract with me and say that you'll do it. Is there anybody who will make that contract? Oh, come on, that's good. I see a couple of hands. Okay, I don't know now, are we going to send me off for my laundry and go to the next stage, or do we have time for any questions?